Hello.
Hey, buddy. Let me just exit out of the YouTube thing real quick.
Yep. And everybody in chat, let me know if you can hear him properly.
Should I be talking more?
Yeah, I have no idea. They're just like the chat died. I think it should be fine. Vashe. I can. Damn, you realize it. Good luck, I guess. Whoosh. Yes. Okay. I think they can. One person has confirmed at least.
Okay, cool.
Otherwise, we'll quiet. Okay, I'll turn you up. User volume. Let's give you 110%. All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. So I am the cop who talked to Vosh. So if you guys want to see me back on Vosh's, you're gonna have to bully him. So we've been exchanging emails for a while, but I think he's a little busy these days. But yeah, I'm the same cop, and I saw RoseWrist's live stream with Vosh, which is how I started watching the channel, and kind of thought that you had a lot of interesting things to say. So that's why I'm here.
Fantastic. All right. I guess we can start with introductions.
So my name's Counterpoints, or Connor. I have a small YouTube channel, started probably about 9 months ago. I served in the Marine Corps for 4 years, from 2006 to 2010. I did deploy to Iraq, but I didn't go into combat or anything like that. Got out, went to college, kind of figured that I didn't do everything that I wanted to do with my life, and I still had some level of community service that I still wanted to participate in. So I became a law enforcement officer. That was probably the most intense and interesting portion of my life. But obviously I saw a lot of things that were wrong with the system, and the way that I kind of position myself politically is I'm probably too conservative for my liberal and progressive friends, and I'm probably too liberal for any of my conservative friends. So I'm always stuck in the middle, trying to evaluate problems as I see them, and taking shit from both sides. So I think
Truly the enlightened centrist.
Yeah, yeah. I'm unironically trying to be the enlightened centrist and catching shit from everybody for it. So, um, I'm not like a particularly confrontational person when it comes to YouTube. So I don't think there'll be very much screaming during this live stream. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of research that you did related to law enforcement that I would be curious about. Because I've seen the way that the system works from the inside perspective. There's plenty of things that I would change about it. But obviously, defund the police or abolish the police. These are subjects that make me uncomfortable, and I think there's maybe some social, logistical, and other factors that we need to address before we can reasonably talk about reducing the size and scope of law enforcement. Not that it can't be done, but we need to have an intelligent conversation about it first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that to some extent. Are you fine with me dropping the link to your YouTube channel in chat?
Yeah, absolutely, do it.
All right, there you go.
Although only one of you subscribe right now, because I'm at 1775, so I need 1776 to screenshot it, and then we can take it from there.
Oh, it seems like you're already at 1777. I think you missed your.
Damn it!
I think you missed your shot already. That was there before I dropped the link, so
no.
I think we should be fine. Yikes. Yeah,
it's all right. I'm unironically, so I know we have a lot of progressives and people who aren't American. I unironically love America, even with all its flaws.
Fair enough. So before we get into more of the content, I think we can start off with just like the basic positions. I mean, you've kind of gone a little bit. You did pretty well when you're like, oh, I want an intelligent discussion and everything. When it comes to issues of defund, abolish the police, things like this, we talked this a little bit during our audio check, but how the way I see it, at least, is that defund the police, very, very catchy. A lot of people are gonna hear that and remember it, but when it comes to like things that are supposed to happen pragmatically, the better way to phrase it would be, refund the police or reallocate funding from the police, which isn't quite as catchy. But along with reallocation of funding from police departments into other social services, you would also see the reallocation of a lot of the police's responsibilities away from the police department to other social services as well. So it's not like the police are going to have to do the same jobs but with less funding. They're going to lose, like, a lot of their responsibilities are going to be delegated to other institutions as well. Additionally, things like militarization of police is something I vehemently disagree with, both from just like a perspective of I don't believe law enforcement officers should be should have access to military grade equipment that they haven't always been given the necessary training in order to use properly. And there's also a bunch of problems with, like, macho culture kind of with the police, but also because a lot of research indicates that it's not effective in reducing crime rates. And those are my main contentions when it comes to militarizing the police, which is kind of tied into their funding. So that's my stance on that. I'm sure it's a little bit more nuanced than a lot of the Twitter opinions you may have heard on this issue.
Yeah, we could get into the weeds pretty quick, and like I don't want to so much like like pick it that I recently debated Mike from PA. It wasn't a particularly productive conversation. Rather than like, because I could come up with a series of justifications or theories or things that I feel like if we were to talk about the roles and responsibilities of law enforcement as they exist now, what we can do, what's responsible, what does law enforcement look like, there's a whole series of things, and like I kind of wanted to pick your brain more than me just talking for long periods of time. But just to kind of illustrate how complex this issue is, one of the things that you brought up that I think is perfectly illustrative of how complex the subject is that you would be taking responsibilities from law enforcement and kind of delegating them to other branches, perhaps unarmed civil service personnel, whether or not those people were armed or had like mace or tasers or were uniformed. That's something that would need to be worked out and negotiated. Whether or not it was straight up just like unarmed social worker people who were going in to intervene. A lot of this comes down to socioeconomics. So, a lot of the factors that I'm sure that we'll talk about today, even if it's not causative, there's probably a lot of correlative links between, poverty and crime. I don't think anybody with, two neurons to rub together would argue that. So
you'd be surprised, by the way, but yeah, keep going.
So I guess my chief contention is, so if I had to summarize my uncomfortableness with the entire subject, is that I think there's a way to do patrol, which is basically driving around in your cop car that's productive and helps the community. And I think there's a way to do it unproductively, which is probably what you're talking about, where you can have as many cops on the road as you want, but if they're doing the wrong things, then it's just going to be fucking people over, and it's going to be counterproductive. So just to kind of like illustrate that very briefly with a single example, even though we have 1,000 things we could talk about already. If I was a patrol cop for 3 years and I loved it, but the way I approach patrol is the way that the American Constitution is actually written, with the Fourth Amendment basically being that if you don't appear to be committing a crime, there's no reason why law enforcement should be fucking with you. So basically, I literally drove the same streets over and over and over again without necessarily interacting with the public unless it was in a positive way. And what I was really doing was I was safeguarding their lives and their property. I have no objection to that kind of patrol, and I think that kind of patrol actually could be a deterrence against property crimes and against violent crimes. I have reasons for that thinking. However, what other cops did, and these were the cops that were praised by the system, these were the cops who were promoted, these were the cops who were basically, this is the culture that they wanted to promote. They did what's called proactive policing, where basically a 60-year-old cocaine addict rolls through a stop sign while buying drugs from his cousin, and you stop him for rolling through the stop sign because technically on a bicycle you're supposed to stop. You search him, you stick your hands in his pockets before he can decline the search. You find cocaine, you arrest him, and then you pressure him so you can go arrest the cousin. That not only that, is that like terribly toxic for the entire community,
Mm-hmm.
and not addressing the substance abuse issues of the 60-year-old addict who, frankly, is, I think we're surprised he's alive at 60 years old doing cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
But also, when you take him to jail, not only is that a waste of the court's time, not only is that a waste of the law enforcement time, but you effectively took the law enforcement officer off the road, so he's no longer doing his job of safeguarding lives and property. And I'll stop there because I think we could tangent in a million different directions.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just to show you that there's a way that law enforcement could do their jobs as they exist now within this framework that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the system as we have it now, which is pretty toxic.
Yeah, so like most of the things you said here, I perfectly agree with. A little caveat, I should have mentioned this before. When I said like the redelegation of responsibilities, um, it not only am I thinking about delegating the responsibilities to different institutions, but also reducing the overall responsibility of these institutions. And what I mean by this, well, the way to reduce the responsibilities of institutions that are meant to tackle criminal activity is by reducing criminal activity in the first place. So a lot of resources that we spend right now towards what's the word, reactive, I guess, like enforcement of laws and crime reduction, such as the police is, more funding stripped away from there and put into preventative measures. So, for example, a really interesting piece of research indicated that, for example, I know you're aware of this. Funding into contraceptive methods, for every dollar put into contraceptive methods, you get around $7 in the long term saved from money saved on on oopsie babies when it comes to like them committing more crime, so police incarceration, food stamps, other social benefits that the mother gets, and things like that. You would save money in the long run. So, well, within reason, of course. Not like the U.S. could just dump their entire budget into contraceptives and see a seven times increase. But within the reason, the investment in preventative measures such as contraceptives saves a lot more money in the long run, and also reduces potential crime rate in the long run, and thereby reducing the scope and the like overall responsibilities of like law enforcement agencies overall. Sorry. Furthermore, one of the things that when it comes to patrolling that you didn't really mention in your you kind of implied it a bit in the second example, but the existence of, for example, quotas within police department is something that I find deeply problematic, because it encourages the exact type of bad behavior that you described in the second example, where you have police officers that are proactively, searching and making, overestimations and inferences in order to be able to fill out these quotas. And it doesn't necessarily have to be quotas, but systems in which people are rewarded and gain, clout or some form of, employment benefits for catching more crimes, I also find problematic. And then thirdly, one of the points you touched on was, just drugs in general. And I, one of the things that I support a lot is the decriminalization of drugs, so ending the drug war, and looking at models such as Portugal's when it comes to directing drug policy for the future. So, if you can just so this drug war thing, for example, is that something, how do you feel about the drug war?
Well, so you kind of hit on like four different subjects that I think are incredibly productive. So number one, I know that the far left, or lefties and progressives, they often view conservatives as completely intractable. You can't change their minds about anything. You can't, even if there was a way to show that it economically benefits the society, that conservatives would not be interested in some of these social reforms. And I think that's incorrect. And as an example, I want to bring up like a parallel example. Florida, where I live, is probably one of the most socially Darwinian places on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Our social safety net sucks. Our drug rehab centers suck. Basically, if you're insane or if you're poor or both, there's not really much that the state is going to do on your behalf. Basically, they're just going to let you suffer and let you die. And that's just the way that it is. So even Florida, the most Darwinian state, probably one of the most Darwinian states in the nation, has seen that when you leave homeless schizophrenics untreated, that basically what ends up happening is those people end up in two places. They end up in jail cells and they end up in emergency rooms, and that costs the taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars per year, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions on a cumulative scale.
Mhm.
So what they found was that by providing monthly antipsychotic medication to homeless schizophrenics, they were basically able to reduce the amount of times that these people were ending up in the emergency room and these people were ending up in jail cells. So not only is that better for, the schizophrenic because he's actually getting his medication, but it's also good for law enforcement because we're not being, we're basically not getting into a fist fight with somebody who has a mental illness. So you're actually you're helping people, you're saving lives, and as Darwinian as this is, you're also being more efficacious with your resources, even though the knee-jerk fiscal conservative reaction is stop being poor, stop being a piece of shit, and they're not going to consider any of these other factors. And then secondly, you were kind of talking about this this negative culture within law enforcement, where cops are actively sticking their hands in the pockets of junkies so they can arrest junkies, get cool statistics, and then
Sometimes not even sticking
get
their hands, and
promoted.
sometimes just taking something out of their own pockets and
So I mean,
placing it
sometimes
anywhere.
I think the only reason why I'm going to push back on that a little bit is because you can throw a stick and hit somebody committing a crime in the United States. So it's not hard to find real. I'm not saying there aren't cops who manufacture stuff. I'm just saying that it's not hard to find the real thing if you're looking for it either. But then that's also a question of being efficacious. How does sticking a junkie, whether it's cocaine, methamphetamine, or heroin, into a jail cell for 2 days, having them, basically go see a judge, be bonded out because they're too poor to basically afford their bail, and then be back in jail the next week for a similar crime? How does that help anybody? It doesn't help the junkie. It doesn't help the cops. It doesn't help the community. It does absolutely fucking nothing productive. So we had, through the drug war, to get to your final question, through the drug war, we have basically completely enabled a toxic atmosphere that doesn't focus on the purpose of law enforcement, which is basically safeguarding the community. We have basically vilified a segment of the population to have the Orwellian 1984 endless enemy, the endless war. We've created the endless war, created the endless warrior, and then just let that cycle perpetuate. And the only way that this is going to get addressed is by a fundamental culture change. And the only way that we're going to have that culture change is by taking the political momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement and using that political capital to change the system in ways that we can kind of all agree on. There's me being an enlightened centrist.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna have to argue with me about the efficaciousness of good optics and pragmatic solutions. But one of the things you mentioned here, yeah, charitability towards conservatism, and the idea that even in like a state such as Florida, this change was made, because it improved it. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like the purpose, yeah, you will absolutely be able to reach out to conservatives and change their mind, given the right, given if they have the right environment to change their mind and whatever in response to new information. Of course, I agree with this. I mean, we see this all the time, especially when it comes to internet advocacy. A lot of people changing their mind. I wouldn't necessarily do what I do if I knew that all who I ever speak to are people who already agree 100% with my opinions. Yeah, I perfectly agree that when confronted with new information in a good and and what's the right word here, and a pragmatic way, absolutely, people that might have an initial aversion to the policy proposal in question might change their mind on it. So yeah, I absolutely agree with it. And then you said that you're against the drug war, which is something that obviously I agree with as well. So
Well, and I just want to make one more point about that too. So a lot of the times, we assume that well, I mean, I guess we all do this to a certain extent, right? We create these demons and these windmills in our head about what other political factions are, and I was guilty of that for a really long time. Like I would say 24 to probably 2017, 2018. I would be one of these right wing shitlords who basically thought that the left was a series of contradictory impulses between like anarchists and communists, where there was no logic to their arguments, and they picked and choose progressive values as they saw fit, and they're completely hypocritical in both their like political goals and their aims and their rhetoric. But what I found through intellectual curiosity was that there are actually unique, codified, coherent factions in the left. So if you were talking about like, progressives or tankies or ancoms or libsocs
I
or
will not
soc
allow the usage of cohesive and tanky in the same sentence. So if you could revise that statement, that would be excellent.
I can't revise it, but I will apologize for it.
All right.
So
Wait, hold on. Okay, I'm just kidding.
but the yeah, so I'm sorry for insinuating that tankies were coherent.
All right,
We could talk about that another day. But but point being that there are factions in the right. So libertarians, fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, alt right, dissident right. All these kind of things. And I'm not saying like you leftists have a moral responsibility to figure out what faction is which. I'm just saying that if you want to use the political moment that we're in, which seems pretty unique, it seems like there's wide popular support for reform. If we want to use this political capital to change the world for the better, we have to form arguments in order to get through the electoral process that actually work. So when you're making fiscal conservative arguments, you have to use financial efficiency arguments. When you're talking to social conservative arguments, who are in the United States and in Western Europe largely Christian, you're going to have to use like utilitarian social well-being and social health arguments. And you're also going to have to talk about, children and the crime, don't punish kids for the crimes of the father.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where I'll stop ranting. But all of that to say, I think the left has real arguments. I think they could find more allies than even they thought possible. But it is a question of optics and argumentation and pragmatism, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I think we have to talk about it.
Yeah, I perfectly agree with like 99% of everything you said there. Obviously, something that I talk about a lot on the stream is pragmatism, is optics. And obviously, if you want to change someone's mind, if you want to convince people about, to join a social movement, to be in support of a certain, policy, as you said, you need to find what that person cares about, and you need to come at this issue from a perspective that they will listen to. I perfectly agree with that. And to play a little bit of devil's advocate here for some of the less, optically effective members of, the left, a lot of people have frustration when it comes to trying to convince right-wing people, because, often you will hear, the whole classical liberal bit. And then they will attempt to appeal to the elements that, the ideology of classical liberalism, cares about and, rests its ideology upon. But then, the longer the discussion goes on and the more arguments you peel apart, a lot of the time you will, find, a difference in like core values, or like just dislike towards certain groups of people, like, minorities and things like that. And that's one of the things that, may frustrate a lot of lefties, how they, they put in this work, they try to come at it from a perspective from which they ideologically should care about. But then the further they go, they find out that, okay, this person just doesn't like minorities, and are just using, classical liberalism as an attempt, like as a facade, to like justify, their ideas.
And I think that's totally real. But if I have to do the work, so do you. And by that I mean, I have been arguing with the followers of the dissident right. I've been arguing with people who are, ethno-corporatists and authoritarians, but refuse to be called fascist. I've been arguing with these people who are the bad actors on my side, who unironically just think that different races are incompatible and can't function together in a society, who think that any multicultural society is doomed to civil war and ethnic conflict, who think that the answer is unapologetic racialism and racism, and also authoritarianism. And they're they will constantly move the ball, where you come up with an argument or a nuance or something simple that kind of maybe doesn't refute, but contextualizes the world, and maybe less of a black pilled doomer, I'm gonna say evil because I find it evil, fucked up perspective, and they'll move the ball on you as soon as you trap them on something.
Mhm.
So that's where I feel like you and I are probably more similar than different in this respect. But if good faith conversations weren't worth having, then there would be no point to society as a whole. And that's where I think we need to have the charitability and maybe like the naivete to say that it's worth it to have these conversations to actually figure out the serious shit. But I know people are probably not here for us to endlessly agree with each other about why conversation is important.
Sure.
They probably want to talk about the more disheartening, violent, and disgusting, fucked up shit of law enforcement. So, I mean, just to kind of launch us down that path, you and I had talked previously. What was your general findings? What was your general summary of the way that law enforcement works, and the way that law enforcement works specifically when it comes to race and outcomes?
Yes. So a lot of this information comes from a research document that me and a friend put together with the help of some other sort of progressive like source libraries and things like that. I've dropped the link to that document in the chat for those of you who want to see what I'm talking about. And basically what this document is a compilation of research from a wide range of different facets of society in general, criminal justice, law enforcement, and aspects related to that, and how it relates to race as an issue. Now, some things, I think this is as good of a time as any. When it comes to this document, obviously it's been spread around quite a bit. Most notably due to Vosh. And I've seen, like a fair bit of criticism being directed towards the document. And like this is something that I just want to mention real quick before we get into like the key points, I guess, from it, is that things just to keep in mind overall when it comes to researching something like this. When it comes to researching discrimination or racism in a sort of, in a system, it is nigh impossible to be able to deductively prove that racism exists. So what do I mean by this? Well, it is impossible to make a study that accounts for every single variable in the world when it comes to sentencing disparities. And, when I put it that way, I'm saying, yeah, well, of course you can't. A lot of people will, hide behind this and be like, well, one of the most common arguments I've heard against this document is that, you don't know 100% if this research is accurate. The research didn't account for whether or not the black defendant in court made other statements akin to a rap verse, and this may have had some detrimental effects to their ability to be sentenced. You will hear arguments like those, and technically that's a hypothetical possibility, but it doesn't happen. So most likely that's not what's happening. So this is the introduction of inductive reasoning when it comes to science, and this is not something that's exclusive by any means to the social sciences. In a lot of different subjects, a lot of the research will be taking up until a certain point, and then they will say, okay, based on this, based on what we've controlled for, based on what we've researched, it is reasonable to assume that there exists some level of racial bias in the criminal justice system of the United States of America. And this is not something that's, as I said before, it happens in other science, but it's not nearly as controversial, and people accept it there, right? And then the fact that every single study in existence has a section where, okay, how we could possibly improve on these findings. And just because such a section exists doesn't mean that we toss out the entire, piece of research that came with it. So when, for example, confronted with a study saying that black men on average receive 20% longer sentences than white men for, similar crimes, And it is found that something like a criticism they received for the first publication in 2012 was that they didn't account for like the violence, like how violent the offense was, and this may have had some effect. In the 2017 one, they revised and they accounted for that. And something that you may think is as obvious as like, oh, if it's more violent, it's going to have a difference in the sentencing result, was not statistically significant. So when something that is, that's obvious doesn't have a statistically significant effect on this 20% disparity, you really have to make some really large leap in logics to assume that none of this 20% is due to racial bias. But more than that, a lot of what you have to do when you look at a section like this is, in order to support a lot of the policies that progressive people are pushing for, such as, reparations, funding of, these underfunded communities and these communities that have like low access to education, healthcare, poor housing, things like that. All you really need to accept for you to have a basis for those types of policy implementations is that there at some point in the United States was discrimination. Because if you picture it this way, if you have, this is an example that you probably heard from another content creator. He's pretty small. I think his name is like Vosh or something. I don't know. And this is like, if there's a race between a bunch of people, and the race starts, and then one of the other contestants like pulls out like a deagle and like pops you in the kneecap, and then keeps running, that's going to slightly impede your ability to run in this race. And if, a little while later into the race, the referee runs up and is like, whoa, you can no longer shoot people in the kneecaps with deagles, that doesn't help the person who was shot in the kneecaps. This person needs to, receive some additional compensation or additional help in order to be able to have a fair shot in this race. And the reason why this is how I tie this back into, American society today is that we know for a fact that wealth gaps grow in the country. They've grown, for decades now. Differences between, the poor and rich is growing, between the classes is growing. We have stickiness at the ends, where people are more likely to stay within their like economic status if they're born towards like the top or towards the bottom of like the economic ladder. And that communities, when they're underfunded, contributes to like a like worse effects in the long term, because crime builds up, people get put in prison, the single motherhood, increases, you have more, babies out of wedlock, they in turn create more crime, it's a negative cycle. So really, to like form the basis with a lot of like regular conservatives, when it comes to doing this, you don't necessarily have to convince them that there is racial bias alive today. All you really have to do is prove that it was alive at some point, and then using a lot of these very well agreed upon concepts like stickiness at the ends and the fact that, communities that are left underfunded for a long time become worse, that can form the basis in order to make these changes. And third of all, what we need to remember is that this is like a discussion about reality. This is about real people in something as significant as discrimination. This isn't, like a logic experiment where you have to try to reason out the best position and you always take it the most moderately in order not to be wrong. Like, this is something that's very severe, very significant, and you can't always say that, okay, well, we shouldn't take any action right now on a policy basis because we haven't seen, a piece of research that accounts for whether or not the black defendant was spitting bars in the courtroom. Like, holding back, important changes that may very well improve the quality of life for, minorities drastically should never be held back based on, such, I would say, conjecture. But yeah, those were 3 points that I had before we get into it. If you have any comments on that, I'm sure you do, because I spoke for a pretty long time.
No, but I sincerely loved it, and I just kind of want to point something out, because if anybody becomes familiar with my channel, you're going to see a drastic difference between this conversation and the debate that I had with Mike from PA. And like, I prefer this so much more because like you can talk intelligently about multiple things, and holy shit, like this makes me feel so much better. So
we have a good inclusive safe space here on the RoseWrist stream.
Thank you. I feel so much better. No, but it's like, but dude, it's not even a question of like, it's not even a question of real contention. Like you bringing up the fact that this affects real people. I think that's part of the reason why myself as an ex-cop and a lot of cops, we take things so incredibly personally, because like when we can talk about like reform and changing the way law enforcement does its job, and what these criminals look like, or like what their lives look like, and kind of what happens and all that kind of stuff. But you have to bear in mind, like law enforcement, we aren't there for for the 30 years while people are raised in poverty. We are not there when they go to substandard schools. We are not there when they face like individual prejudice on an interpersonal level that makes them hostile to people not of their ethnic group. We're not there when they're raised in a culture that views law enforcement as the enemy. We are only there when a series of factors, kind of all like including personal choice, but also socioeconomic factors, all result in an extremely poor choice that results in law enforcement intervention. And I'm saying this as tactfully as I can, but basically like some of these choices are like getting high on cocaine and beating a woman within an inch of her life, within like in front of her family.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it's kind of hard as a cop, but I'm hoping to do it in this conversation. It's hard, like it's hard to take the very personal like anger and vengeance that you want against somebody who does something horrible, and then extricate that into like the a personal larger social factors that played into this violent event or played into this criminal event. It's very hard not to take it personally when you see somebody commit a crime that's so egregious. And that's where looking at like violence as a contributing factor to crimes, I think is so important, because well, and you kind of mentioned that it didn't have an effect. um, I think that that's kind of where you, rather than having like this cold calculated thing where you're like, hey, listen, the white dude beat the shit out of his girlfriend within an inch of her life. The black dude, beat the shit out of his girlfriend as well. The black dude caught 20% more time than the white dude, and we've controlled for all these variables. The reason why there's this knee-jerk reaction to just be like, oh well, there must be reasons that we're not accounting for, is because of this disgust with this criminal event. But it's not necessarily rational, and it's also not going to solve the problem. And so that's where I kind of think that we need to talk a little bit about like internal racism versus like systemic racism, and like
Mm-hmm.
I think you should probably summarize it better than me. But a lot of cops will reject, like flat out, they'll just reject that they're interpersonally racist, because they generally start from, most cops anyways, I'm sure there's plenty of shitty people, they'll generally start from a position of, I will treat anybody from any race the same way, whether that's well or poorly. And basically like, I will treat a piece of shit like a piece of shit no matter what. So they'll reject the interpersonal argument for racism, but then they won't even consider the systemic implications, or how we're perpetuating like a toxic and self-fulfilling prophecy
Mm-hmm.
that is just seeing us continue this cycle of violence that we see in impoverished communities in America. So maybe you can take it from there.
Yeah. I like when it comes to when it comes to like convincing people, like you said, a lot of people have this anti-knee-jerk reaction. I agree with this, and this has to do with like the way we present this information. I'm gonna start with like the things I like agree with what you just said. A lot of the like the discourse surrounding this issue is, I wouldn't say untrue, but like unhelpful, unproductive. When it comes to like a lot of I'm not gonna be popular for saying this, but to some extent, right? I understand that a lot of people like really dislike cops and really dislikes police, but when it comes from like if we're being like hyper pragmatic, it would be a lot easier if we are more nuanced about it. And I understand that it's not as fun, it's not as like it's not as easy, it's not as catchy. It would probably be beneficial if we are more nuanced when it comes to the way we express our disagreements and contentions with the criminal justice system.
And can I interject just like one point just
Yep.
to play into
Go for
that,
it.
so maybe we can focus it so your chat doesn't murder you. So this this feeling, like I understand this feeling to get emotional and angry and upset and channel that into political momentum and to be searching for reform. I understand that impulse completely. And I also understand, like, even if you're like, well, hey, listen, my friend, myself, my parents, my family, we've all been fucked by this system. Why would we be rational? Why would we be emotionless in our desires for reform? It's not our job to basically, like, basically find the charitable interpretation of what's going on when we're being fucked over by a system. But what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of political consensus that could be built between law enforcement and the community, because we're both trapped in the same cycle of violence. And anybody who's trapped in that cycle for a prolonged period, whether it's the person enforcing the crime or the person who is basically being fucked over by the system, they both want to see an improved world. And I think that's where political momentum, that's where I think the political momentum for reform actually exists. And then I'll shut up and go, please.
Hi. One of the things I noticed in relation to this is that a lot of like more lefty people forget certain like principles that we have specifically when it comes to police, and this is due to the emotional aspect. So an example of this, what I believe it, like an example of this would be, a lot of people saying that, if you're a cop right now, the only way to be good is by leaving your job. And while like intuitively it's like, yeah, of course, if we've already established, we all agree that this is a negative system, it perpetuates racism, all these bad things, so a good moral person would drop out of the system. Well, then we've forgotten a bunch of the other values that we hold as leftists, which is that everyone can't just like lamau, like I'm quitting my job, and just move on and expect to be able to find they might have family, they might have people they want to care for, they might have medical bills. We know how really poor like the economic system is for a lot of Americans when it comes to like healthcare bills, living paycheck to paycheck, things like this, and how we kind of just like forget that and throw that out the window when we're talking about police, and them like having to quit the service. Something I do agree with though is that something that the left could really do and would be efficacious towards the goals, would make us look really good, would be more like I guess like beneficial and improve the idea that police and law enforcement members have of progressive and us on the left, is if we can still hold this belief that morally, like, the system as it exists today, people should leave it, by providing things like exit programs for police. So by setting up systems where, hey, if you're a police right now in the United States of America, then we like you can leave right now, and you will know that you have this, you have the support of this group of people and this institution that can financially back you, that can support you in finding your next job, that can provide you with whatever, in order to achieve the goal we have of getting people who disagree with the system out of law enforcement, while at the same time keeping true to our principles of like working class people and how they can't just like leave their job, things like that. That's something that I, like a little piece of like hypocrisy that I've noticed, and that can easily be, accounted for, because I don't think a lot of people would like disagree. I think this is more like people haven't thought about this more than people aggressively would disagree with this. Basically, like exit programs for people in law enforcement who want to like get out of there. It would make us look a lot better. But that was I think I spent a little bit too long on that tangent. I had a little bit before that's a little bit more important to talk about. But most of the things you said before I agree with. I had some contentions when you said like, oh, they made the choice to do this. I personally am like a determinist. I believe that like, if you hypothetically had like a machine where you could plug in every single variable that a person would experience, you could predict with 100% certainty like what actions they would take. But that's just like a minor problem. I agree with like the general sentiment and things that you said like that. And this comes back to, highly topical, I guess. Something that Michael Brooks always talked about. I think one of his famous quotes goes something like, be ruthless with systems, but kind with people. And, in this example, the people are, the workers within the law enforcement industry, and the system is the police departments, law enforcement, criminal justice as it exists today. We need to, not shift the blame on individual people who work within the agency, and put it towards the system, the way it's structured, and the way it's encouraging this type of behavior from the members of law enforcement. And that's one of the things that is very important. Be ruthless with systems but kind with people. And then, like you said before, the overt versus implicit racism, obviously would be really really anti-pragmatic to go around saying that, well, the reason why people have this 20% higher sentence is because the judge looks at this person's like, well, on account of you being black, you now get a 20% longer sentence. Like, no, that's not how it works. And this implicit, something that's important to acknowledge, is this implicit racial bias probably exists with a very large portion of the population that aren't in the criminal justice system. This is not an issue exclusive to the criminal justice system. This is an issue that has to do with our culture and people in general, and this is the way in which it is expressed within criminal justice. That's like just generally a better way to put this and to talk about it, in my opinion, and I'm sure you would agree.
Oh, dude, I got so many things. No, that was dope. But like, so I don't want to tangent on this point first, so I'll kind of go back to the original. So, I think this is super interesting that I keep bumping into super smart people who are all determinists. Like some of my friends in my life who are super smart are determinists. I think Vosh is a determinist. You are, Destiny is. So I kind of feel like a dipshit for disagreeing on this point, but I kind of wanted to bring this up, and maybe if you want to like write a note or something for your counter argument, I'd appreciate it.
Yep.
Because it bugs me a little bit. Right. So like I understand like determinism, like basically saying like the way that the world works is pretty much mechanical. Even when you're talking about like psychology or interpersonal choices or anything like that, the universe seems mechanical, and basically even though you have the illusion of choice, you are probably factoring in factors that are already pre-existing prior to the choice. So your choice in that way from like a chronological standpoint is already made. However, what I would argue, because this is kind of like a religious or like Christian perspective, is that the way that you conceptualize choice actually alters the way that you're able to make choice. So if you believe that you have free will, even if you have a deterministic world, like even if the world is deterministic, believing in such a thing as free will allows you to pause when you're on the precipice of a major decision and say, listen, the choices that I make right now are going to have serious consequences for the rest of my life. I have to take time and evaluate it because I am a free agent who is making choices of my own free will. Just that pause before you make a very large choice is in and of itself basically affecting determinism versus not determinism. I'm not saying on a mechanical level. I'm just saying on how your life works out. So that's kind of where I would just say that like the conception of choice does play into this, whether we like it or not. And we could probably have a whole philosophical debate on determinism versus free will another time. But so let's talk about cops quitting the system, because I think that's one of my biggest fears when I talk to defund or when I talk to abolish the police people. So if we had tomorrow, if we had let's say that the left established like cop quitting transition, support services or something like that, and then law enforcement left law enforcement en masse tomorrow. Okay, patrol was cut in half, the drug units were cut in half, the administration was cut in half, but we hadn't put into place these new systems that actually take away the responsibilities from law enforcement, and we hadn't put in like the socioeconomic conditions that would actually improve people's lives materially. Basically what you would have at that time from a warfare, and like I am a former Marine, so you're gonna have to excuse my militarization of the terms, but what you're gonna have there from a political and from a war counterinsurgency standpoint is a power vacuum. We've effectively taken a dominant, authoritative gang that has incredible power, and we've cut their power in half. If you don't have material conditions improved in the meantime, if you don't have social services that are going to pick up the slack, you're going to have a utilitarian nightmare in which the streets are basically going to be shitty. And I know that so for instance, like a lot of people like to bring up that law enforcement didn't respond to non-emergency calls during the slowdown in New York in the summer of like 2018, and violent crime as a result did not go up. But at the same time, property crime right now is a problem, and it is real. When people work their fucking asses off and their houses get jacked, it's easy on the external to say, oh, well, nobody died, so it's not a big deal. You know, insurance will cover most of it. So, you know, pretty much like go fuck yourself to the person who was violated. That's not a moral pill that I'm willing to swallow. It's not a moral pill that a lot of cops are willing to swallow. And I doubt it's something that a lot of normie citizens are willing to swallow. So until you address that power vacuum, until you bring up like, you know, the way that police responsibilities are going to be delegated to these other institutions, that's like a non-starter for me personally, as somebody, even as somebody who is involved in the institution. And then to go on to that point, a lot of law enforcement would agree with you that we have relied on teachers and law enforcement for too many jobs in our society. Law enforcement should not be called to a house where a teenager is being truant and calling her mom a bitch. A law enforcement officer should not be called to a neighborly dispute over like, this guy threw gravel in my yard. You know, there needs to be, but you have to have those institutions. That way society can kind of resolve those disputes without a man with a gun showing up. And I think a lot of cops would actually want that, because it allows them to focus on the real parts of their job, which is securing lives and property. And then final point, and I promise, like, please take notes and fucking rebut me. But the implicit bias that we talked about with white versus black. I know Vosh has talked about this a lot of the time, but I think we need to address this, and by we I mean the left. Implicit bias can be a very like surgical concept, where it's just like, hey, the majority versus the minority in any society is going to have preconceptions and biases that they hold against that minority, many of them not positive. And as a result of those preconceived biases, there are going to be outcomes within the society that negatively affect the minority. The problem that I see a lot of dissident right people seizing onto is the fact that this has been racialized, and it seems like white people, because of our colonial past, are the only people who are even making this moral consideration. So if you talk about, authoritarian China, or if you talk about, basically authoritarian regimes in general, they don't give a fuck about the minority to begin with. So any arguments against like implicit bias, they're going to be like, yeah, we know we're biased against these people, but fuck these people.
Yeah.
To purely racialize it.
Just one second. Yeah, and that's one of the most important thing. When people, that's one of the things I've noticed most when people try to like rebut the document and the research, is that half of the time they will try to deny the existence of this bias, but then they also flip-flop between denying the existence of the bias and trying to justify the bias. And this is something that needs to be like detected and called out and then addressed appropriately. But yeah, keep going.
Oh no, I think I had my soapbox for long enough, so I'm gonna let you rebut and give me as much information as you can.
All right. Well, there isn't a whole lot to rebut here, in my opinion. I agree with a lot of what you said. Like obviously, when it comes to redistributing funds and responsibilities from the police, that's nowhere near as catchy as defund the police. Jesus. When it comes to that, it's absolutely not something that should happen immediately. We should definitely have like a well thought out model beforehand, implement it slowly, see how it what responses you are given at the time, and then adjust it accordingly. Absolutely. It shouldn't be just like, well, tomorrow now you lose all of this, you lose X, Y, and Z, but you have the same job, same responsibilities. Like you said, in some ways you could compare the police departments to gangs. When one reduces power, others seep in and take part of the power vacuum. I absolutely agree with you in that regard. Yeah, absolutely, this would be something that should be implemented responsibly, basically. However, this isn't even however, never mind. And then there are some like more immediate changes that you can make to police departments right now that you can like implement while you try to work on the more overall, like model change. So, for example, looking at police unions and the way they operate, like quotas for catching people, like policies like like stopping like problematic practices like those can be tackled like immediately in the short term, without us having to be afraid of like major like criminal repercussions coming from that. So I agree. This is not something that could happen immediate, because there will be a power vacuum. It needs to be done responsibly and intelligently. The only thing I kind of disagree with a little bit is how the creation of these exit programs will lead to like mass like people leaving from police departments. I don't think this would happen. I think would see some people leaving police departments, and yeah, but I don't think you would see this en masse thing. And additionally, I've also seen some research indicating that there is that we have like too many like for it to be effective in terms of resource allocation, people working within law enforcement. But that's just like a minor thing. I don't believe that having effective exit programs for people that do want to leave the system would lead to like a massive problem in that regard. That's the only thing I disagree with. But otherwise, yeah, everything you said sounds like common sense to me. So yeah.
Okay, well let me be bad faith for a second.
Hit me with it.
So one of the things that I find deeply ironic, this is said totally tongue in cheek, but what I find completely ironic is leftists wanting to break up a union because it's toxic and bloated and bureaucratic and protects bad actors. That's one of the greatest like ironies of this entire thing. But I think we do have to have a conversation about like, should police unions, because they largely exist for legal representation of law enforcement law enforcement officers when they do something incorrectly. That's probably their primary function. Like a lot of police unions are supposed to be like fraternal organizations, and they're supposed to be like clubs, which has its own problems. But largely you pay $15 a month, $20 a month, and if you get into a bad shooting, you will have vigorous legal defense, regardless of whether or not you're right or wrong. So there's like a series of questions of like morals and ethics and how we hold people accountable. And one of the things that got brought up during one of Vosh's streams, where he was talking about like the militarization of police, that I found so incredibly interesting, is he basically brought up, like, in passing, I don't even know if he conceptualized it fully, but he brought up that the military has an independent judicial arm and an independent legal structure to hold its military members accountable for misconduct during war. Why don't we have that for law enforcement, was kind of his question. And I thought that was fucking genius. And the reason why I thought that was so smart was because a lot of the hesitation on behalf of state attorney's office and behalf of basically the judicial system itself to hold law enforcement accountable is because they basically know that sentencing a cop who killed somebody in the line of duty improperly, sentencing him to a general population jail for 10 years is pretty much a fucking death sentence. You might as well be a child molester, because basically the way that both hardened and not hard criminals view law enforcement is it's akin to that level of disgust and hatred for being class traitors or race traitors or whatever. So the state attorney goes softball on cops because they basically know that any serious sentence that they impose on a law enforcement officer is a potential threat to their life. So if you had an independent judiciary, if you had an independent jail, if you had laws that were written for police misconduct that were specific and proportionate to the kind of misconduct that they were capable of. So for instance, if it was like intentionally fucked up, if it was corrupt, then basically throw the book at them, put them under the jail. If it was a mistake, then, and basically investigation reveals that it was just a mistake or a lapse in judgment, then maybe a lesser sentence than actually murder one or murder two. I think an independent judiciary and an independent judicial system could actually hold cops accountable in a way that would actually be the will of the people, even if that makes them uncomfortable. And then I do have two other points, but I wouldn't mind just discussing that that point with you.
Yeah,
just so
we can
don't
we can
too
go point
lost.
by point. Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't get too lost in the sauce.
Exactly. So I'm gonna go over like a bit about the union thing, and then the judiciaries and the comparison to like child molesters or whatever. Yeah, and again, this is like a sort of because you tied it back to at the end where you talked about the independent judiciaries and whatever. But if there is like most things, if there is like a high profile case, if you suspect that a certain criminal may be facing violent action within the within a prison, then measures should be taken to ensure that they are safer. Like they do this when there's like high profile cases, when there is someone who's done something extraordinarily bad, like child molestation, for example. Wow, actually no, this is the U.S. prison system. Whoops, my bad. Yeah,
I was about to say we don't do that. We just throw them in the
I was thinking about the progressive utopia. So yeah, but okay, but yeah, I don't think that's a good justification, because you could technically use the same justification for child molesters. Like, should you really give them a if you give them a certain prison sentence, you're effectively giving them a death sentence. So shouldn't you like have a lower sentence just to not give them it's a very weird
You're not gonna like my answer to that question.
Oh no!
So we can move
on.
on.
Okay, hold on. Oh, okay, but
no. I'm not saying less sentencing. I'm saying maybe their consideration should be the same as everybody else's for that reason. But but
I mean, ideally, I would say that the best way to deal with this issue would be to have means by which the criminal isn't subject to violence in the prison thing, rather than giving them a lower sentence, because I'm
not purely rational when it comes to to egregious crimes, like when it comes to egregious crimes like forcible rape and child molestation. I'm not purely rational, and I do have a little bit of an old west mentality where it's like string them up in front of the courthouse. But I know that's not
Hey,
rational.
in Minecraft.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about the law here, so in the 19th century, sometimes violent offenders were punished in ways that were public.
This is a historical stream, yes.
Yeah, yes. So anyways, but now that we know that I'm not pro reducing child molester sentences, I think we can move on. I just didn't want somebody to take that the wrong way.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. But yeah, the way I would see that he would fix this would not be adjusting sentences. It would be fixing the issue of violent activity occurring within prisons. And there's like a whole way, like so many ways to do this. There's so many other models and so many good examples to draw from from other countries. So that would be the way I would solve that. But onto like a little bit of the unions things. I'm currently like researching about the union thing for the exact reason that you're talking about. I can think of like three things right off the bat. This is I wouldn't say this is like my formalized take on it. This is more like, okay, I'm thinking about it, and this is where I am right now. This is what I'm thinking about. The differences with like unions in public versus private sectors, there are a few key differences there that might make the situation completely like different. You could also make the argument that, well, like most things, I support X thing when it has positive outcomes, and I dislike X thing when it has negative outcomes. Like most things. So you're not just like overall, no matter what, I will always be pro-union. You can be like, well, I'm pro-union when it helps people, like when the overall effect of this union is positive, and I dislike unions when the overall effect of it is negative. I wouldn't say that's an unreasonable position to have. And then the third thing you brought up, the military thing, and how you can make a lot of really good comparisons between the police and military today, and how, for example, there are really good reasons why unions aren't allowed in the military that could perhaps be justified within the police department as well. So those are just like the three things I have on union thing right now, like how I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I'm trying to like have like a complete like formalized take on this soon. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and likewise, I think there's actually a good comparison here. So the same way that law enforcement is probably overburdened with too many roles and responsibilities, therefore it's good at some things and it's terrible at other things. There likewise probably needs to be an evaluation of the union, because if you bring up basically eliminating the police union, one, you're going to get pushback for the reason that I brought up earlier, that the union provides legal representation to law enforcement officers that are accused of criminal conduct, and as members of the public who serve the public, they should be they should be entitled to a rigorous defense on their behalf, for their sacrifices or something like that. I'm sure they would give you some line about that shit.
Yeah.
Likewise,
And I would agree. Like, just because, like, for example, if we were to make the change that unions weren't allowed in police departments, that does not by any means mean that these people should not be able to be given like adequate legal defense, and the funding from that should be drawn from the government or state budget, and they have a fair bit of
even
money
if it wasn't. Even if it was like a voluntary contributing fund, I don't think anybody would really care. But then likewise, there's also the same way though. So just talking about like positive and negative and toxic and non-toxic unions. So the criminal defense being one component of the union, the other one being negotiating and resolving labor disputes between basically the people who serve the public and their administrators. I see that as a perfectly viable and normal use for a union. So I think that would be justified. And then, but I think finally where it gets toxic is where it becomes this cudgel to resist reform, both from the public and from the administration, where they basically say, fuck you, we have this legal contract basically highlighting our duties, responsibilities, and all that kind of stuff. And if you try to modify it, we're going to fight you tooth and nail. I think that's where part of the demand for reform needs to come from the outside. And it also can't come from administrators. And the reason why it can't come from law enforcement is because basically they're not entitled to criticize the institution that they're a part of without facing censure or recrimination. So that's part of the reason. There's a variety of reasons why I got out. But the reason why I didn't talk about law enforcement while I was in law enforcement is because I knew I would be instantly retaliated against, whether it was legal or not. There's so many things that they can do to make your law enforcement career more dangerous and more shitty, that it's just not worth it to speak up on the things that you think you need to change while you're a part of the institution. And then final point, and then I'll hand the soapbox over. So I wanted to bring this up to Vosh. I think I brought it up in passing, but he did a video recently basically talking about it, where he was debating whether or not Ben Shapiro actually received a legal education from Harvard, because he was so stupid for thinking that the state attorney's office had improperly charged Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd case. But what I'm going to tell you, I don't think will be shocking to anybody, but it might be new information, hopefully, is the fact that American state attorneys will charge people with murder and with murder too, in order to make the public feel good while they're running up to a case. So they will overcharge the defendant when they technically have the ability to charge
give a bunch of charges, right?
Yep. They can charge them with the lower crime, they can charge them with the mid-tier crime, and they can charge them with the higher crime, but they only charge them with the higher crime intentionally. That way, the public feels good on the front end, and then
they can get out, basically.
They can get acquitted.
Yep.
That's the whole point.
Yeah, so. And you mentioned this. I actually rewatched your conversation because you mentioned this in your last conversation with Vosh. I watched it this morning to refresh, and yeah, this is absolutely like something I agree with. I mean, I agree with. It's something that happens, It's something that needs to be understood and called out more. Something I would like to ask you about in regards to like the whole like police union culture within. Oh, that's gonna be a quick ban on that one. Jesus. Give me a second. Oops. Okay. Well, I don't know why that person felt the need to do that. Okay. Yeah, it would be like when it comes to the police unions and everything. How much like support do you think there would be for
last year?
No, like because you said it yourself, right? You felt a form of like pressure that you couldn't speak openly about your thoughts about the police department and certain practices and maybe certain individuals because you were afraid of like repercussions being enacted against you. Do you think that that's like a sentiment that enough people feel and that can be capitalized and like on enough? That can be capitalized on sufficiently in order to serve as like an argument towards looking at the way police unions work and just general culture around defending law enforcement officers, like to the utmost degree when it comes to issues like this.
Yes, but I kind of want to qualify it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's I brought up like low level corruption that I saw while I was in, and I think people have kind of constructed conspiracy theories about what I look the other way on. So I never saw like individual brutality or excessive force or anything like that. What I did see though was I saw small things that I didn't like. So, for instance, I there was a law enforcement officer who was calling out traffic stops because we did have not we didn't have a quota for tickets, but we basically had I'm just going to call it a quota because it's a fucking quota. We had a quota for traffic stops,
Mm-hmm.
so we didn't have to write a ticket, but we did have to pull over a certain amount of people over, or else we were viewed as being unproductive.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I went to back that person up a few times, and I got to the intersection where they said they had been doing a traffic stop, and they weren't doing a traffic stop. The cars didn't exist, and that person wasn't at that intersection.
Mm-hmm.
So they were basically lying about the work that they were doing in order to play a numbers game to appease the administration. If I had called that person out, and I did call them out to like peers where I was like, hey, this person's fucking shady. Like, don't trust this person because they're fucking. If you lie about small shit, you're gonna lie about big shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I was like, hey, look out for this person, but never brought it up any further than that. And this person was known for like exaggerating things too, where like on scene we would see things a certain way, and that person would see things in a more extreme light, and you don't know if that's like a difference of perception or if that's like them exaggerating the story for some like weird social flaw, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where like I see the fact that we weren't able to call that person out and hold them accountable for their bad behavior as toxic, but I'm also like, I am reliant on these people, including that person, that if I'm in a fist fight, that they're going to drive their car to me as quickly as possible so they can help me in that fist fight.
Mm-hmm.
I am reliant on that person that if I am confronting a violent suspect who is armed, that they will back me up. So basically, like, do you want me to call out the small level line? Well, then I don't want to get killed for doing it.
Yep.
And I don't know what the I don't know what the mechanism for dealing with that low level corruption is, except for having an independent judiciary, an independent investigative wing, and an independent sentencing structure. Because I likewise wouldn't rat on that person because I wouldn't want them to end up in jail and getting killed because they lied about a traffic stop.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like the crime does not meet, or the punishment doesn't meet the crime, but it feeds into dishonesty and corruption that I wouldn't want to tolerate under better circumstances.
Yep. Um, yeah, I agree with. Wow, there's a lot of interesting people in chat today. Um, so
It happens.
yeah, this is usually nothing. I think it's because we're talking about Black Lives Matter. So yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, like you said, like independent institutions, some sort of like third party that can hold like you know activities that happen within police departments accountable rather than you know police being the people that they hold themselves accountable, they protect themselves, they ensure that they don't get to have like some sort of like third party that they can like appeal to and file complaints for and have it handled in a in a responsible way. So for example, in that example that you made with somebody like not driving to your location or not backing you up in like a violent encounter, a third party institution basically that ensures that that type of behavior within the police force is not permissible in that regard, rather than expecting police to police themselves in that regard.
Well, and even if it's an independent agency like a state police department, it is well known in the state of Florida that state police will arrest other cops, and
Mm-hmm.
in that way, state police are kind of uncorruptible. Because if you are speeding in your off-duty car, you will get a ticket from a state police. If you commit a crime, it doesn't matter whether or not you're an officer. If a state police officer catches you committing a crime, they will arrest you and they will report it to your chain of command. I'm trying to think of other examples, but basically, state police don't give a fuck, and that scares other departments. So that's kind of like where we were talking about like the gangs metaphor earlier in the power vacuum. You have to use power to check power. So that's where I'm saying like an independent investigative agency would solve a lot of these problems, and that's kind of just my little 2 cents.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said on that point. Yeah, is there any other major point?
Yeah, well, I think to kind of get back to the the subject of like Black Lives Matter specifically,
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing is like we we kind of had this conversation via Twitter where you're like, well, do you support Black Lives Matter? And I was like, well, if you're talking specifically about like Black Lives Matter activists who are woke leftists who have certain perspectives on the family or economics or something like that, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But do I believe that our system treats Black lives as if they matter? And my answer would be no. And then if the follow-up question was, should it? The answer is absolutely yes. So that's where I think we have to have this, like this more productive conversation about what real change looks like, how we get there, and how we get a society that treats lives, especially minority, brown and Black lives, like they matter as much as a white life.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to have that conversation because there's real people who are being killed, real people who are being hurt by the system as it exists now. And there's a lot of things that we could do that I think we need to do. So for instance, dividing up the responsibilities. And if we're wrapping up, that's totally fine. I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to pick a next part of the conversation I would want to have,
Mm-hmm.
I would want to have a conversation about what is the actual role of law enforcement in modern society.
Mm-hmm.
How do we take out the responsibilities that should not be theirs, and how do we do that in such a way that we don't hurt or kill more people?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we can touch on this rather briefly. I don't know how much, like personally, I can contribute to this subject, as there's like the whole, really questioning about the, there's probably, a lot more like anarchists have done more research about this, for example, about the role of police and stuff like that. But, like, yeah, of course, it's navigating a tight line. Is that I think that's the word. Like where you have to balance the goals, the purposes that you have with these changes, while not being counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve. So just intuitively, I would say that we need to scale down the usage of police officers for non-violent, not necessarily like criminal, but disruptive activity in society. We need to how do you say it, adjust or balance the tools and the equipment that law enforcement is given accordingly. So this would mean a reduction in like militarization of police force and police units and things like that, and then as well as finding like the appropriate institutions to take the responsibilities that will no longer be delegated to police officers. So an example of this right off the bat, when it comes to drug use, ideally what we should do is drug problems should no longer be a criminal issue, it should be a medical issue. The responsibility for dealing with drug abuse and drug use and things like that should fall more on medical institutions and just social services in general. Something that they have in Portugal, which is interesting, is that if you are found with consuming drugs, or whatever. I think it's probably in a public area, or it's a private area somehow. Then what they would do is they will not arrest you. They will not put you to prison. They will not take you to the police station. They will not do that. I do believe they may tightrope. That's the word I was looking for. What I believe they do is they may confiscate whatever you have on you at the time, and then what they will give you is they will give you like a time and appointment to meet with a council of 2 social workers and 1 like medical worker of some sort, like a doctor or something. And what they do then is they analyze the circumstances surrounding your use of drugs. So what they see here is that, well, was this drug usage caused by some sort of underlying factor? Like, was this person laid off recently? Did they have a family member die? Did they, fall behind on some bills? Were they evicted? All these things. And then after that analysis has been run and that communication has taken place, they will, put this person in contact with the necessary institutions and systems in order to correct that issue. If they find that this person, there was like barely any underlying issues or underlying variables surrounding their use of drugs, what will happen then is that they will be pretty much let off, unless they're caught within 6 months, again, in which there will be like a more scrutinous analysis of their conditions once again if they get caught. So something like that, when it comes to drug use, for example, is one way where we could deal with one of the largest allocations of police officers, drug abuse, in a way that is responsible and that has been shown to work in other nations.
And I think there's a lot of productive territory there. I think a lot of fiscal conservatives are basically going to ask whether or not that's financially efficient. But my counter argument to that, as the enlightened centrist,
Yes.
is not when you arrest somebody, when you take them to jail, when they bond out, when they come back for a court date, when they get sentenced to 30 days in jail or whatever, and they just sit there, and they catch a felony, so they're unemployable. Basically, not only have you wasted the state's time, the cops' time, the court's time, the judge's time, the person's time, you have also basically made a life irredeemable in a way that would actually be healthy and productive for that person. So the economic damage caused by a single unproductive person who is permanently unproductive because of a felony record, and also the wasted time and resources, I would like to see that scaled compared to social intervention, compared to talking to counselors, compared to using social resources and charities to put this person in an improved position. And there's this conservative, like a Darwinian response to just say, oh, well, they're a junkie and a criminal, so fuck them. But what I would say about that is a lot of these social conservatives claim to be Christian, and part of being Christian is, redemption. So that's where if you don't provide people opportunities to redeem themselves, they're not going to. And that's where my father-in-law, he actually runs it's faith-based, so I know that's cringe for some of our atheist viewers. But he runs a 2-year in-house faith-based rehabilitation program, and their success rate is like 90%. Because not only do they address the substance abuse issues that are often the result of childhood and adulthood trauma, they also get these people jobs. They get them working. They teach them how to balance a budget. They teach them how to manage a household. They teach them how to manage their family. They teach them how to improve relationships. They teach them how to communicate. And giving men who are otherwise fallen their lives back is it's truly inspiring in ways that a lot of people are going to find cringe, because it's positive emotion, it's actual productivity, it's not doomer pilled, it's not negativity, it's not bullshit. And that's where I'm saying, to anybody who's listening to this who is completely doomer pilled and they think we're on the brink of a civil war and we should just get it over with and kill each other and smash the system and all that kind of shit, I just invite you to maybe think about these positive things that we can do, and these people who are doing these things, and the world that we actually could create. And then I'm hoping that we can move the ball and move closer to that society through conversations like this, rather than my debate with Mike from PA, where he just called cops racist, wife beating, steroid addicts who like executing people.
Yeah, I agree. It's about being, pragmatic and being effective.
Not,
So yeah, you're about to say something. Hello.
I'm losing you. Oh, I
Oh,
was just saying, I'm losing you a little bit, but I think that was a great first conversation. I would love to do it again and kind of get into nitty gritty sometime in the future whenever you're feeling it.
yep.
But I'm good there, and I think we did
Yeah.
we covered a lot of really cool territory.
Yeah, something that I just want to mention real quick when it comes to this drug decriminalization thing that I would really recommend looking into. Um, so Portugal is like I would say like the ideal model when it comes to this because they've done this, exceptionally well. So let's see if I have everything. Yep, I think I have everything here. In Portugal, like they passed this policy in 2001, so we've had like 20 years to see how this develops. So we're sure that this is like this is something that stays true for a long period of time, and this is probably what's going to happen. This is not like an analysis done like say like 6 months after a policy was passed. In addition, this was something that was really like a hot button issue. In 1999, the number one voted issue within Portugal was drug use and drug abuse. And this after this policy was passed, that like fell way down. It's not even like on the top 10 list anymore. And just some interesting data points surrounding the effects this policy had on Portugal is that problematic, like addictive drug use fell. Infections for HIV, for example, through, like needles and stuff like that, fell. Adolescent drug use fell. Overdose deaths fell. The people who were like admitted into like systems for drug use, things like that, was cut in third, despite all the other things also falling. People voluntarily entering treatment increased drastically, and it was also financially effective because they saved a bunch of money on all the things you mentioned previously. So when it comes to like drug policy, it's really an open and shut case, and this comes exactly back to like what this whole discussion is about. Really, we like a lot of people know, us really well researched woke political actors. We may know that this is how you do it, this is effective, this is good, this is beneficial, but the main challenge is being able to present it in a good way. So the way you presented it right now is really important because we have all this, statistical, empirical backing to our ideas, but we need to find a way to present this in a way that people care about. And that's the core point of this discussion and what we've been talking about for the past, what is it, like an hour and a half now. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to kind of reaffirm that as we close out. So the point is, if you come at it from a position of all cops are pieces of shit, the system is irredeemably corrupt, we have to smash everything, basically all that kind of stuff, you're going to alienate a lot of normies and you're going to alienate cops. But if your sales pitch is, listen, Portugal's been doing this for 20 years, all of the metrics that you care about have dropped precipitously as a result of the adoption of this policy. Law enforcement officers are going to be able to focus on property crimes and violent crimes, the actual reason why they exist in the first place. If cops want to get into fights because they're adrenaline junkies, they can still, get into real fights with actual violent criminals instead of harassing junkies on a day-to-day basis. This will free up law enforcement, allow them to do their jobs better. Not only that, but we have a drug crisis in our country in which people are desperate, partially because of economics and partially because of trauma, and they are falling by the wayside. In order to live in a good and wholesome society, and if they're religious, pitch it to them, a more Christian society, we can't just be punishing people by beating them up and throwing them in cages. We have to offer them a real opportunity at a healthy and productive and happy life, and we have to give them that opportunity as a society. These are all pitches that can be argued against in bad faith. Rarely do I think you can have arguments against these in good faith. And that's where I think the left has a terrible optics problem, where the best ideas, dude, if I was still watching the YouTube videos that I was in 2016, I would assume that the entirety of the left were, aggressive, violent communists who wanted to turn my children gay and trans, and who basically wanted the obliteration. Oh, Did I lose you? Can you
Nope.
still hear me?
Nope, I can still hear you perfectly.
All right, excellent. So I would assume that the left basically wanted the destruction of the white race, and it wanted to basically completely fuck up society in all these like anti-conservative ways. And I'm sure if you wanted to find the more extremist leftists, you can find them. However, there's real proposals that would make society infinitely better than it exists now. And I think it's a question of optics. I think it's a question of positioning. I think it's a question of salesmanship. And I think it's a question of finding good faith people who are across the aisle who are equally interested in living in a better society.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. That was a fantastic wrap up to this entire conversation. If you'd like to end it off with shouting out your socials, that would be fantastic. This is the first time I've remembered to ask my guests to do that. So I really need to work on that. But we're starting off strong with this one. So
nice.
Yeah.
So I have a YouTube channel called Counterpoints. If anybody subscribes there, you're probably gonna fuck up my subscriber count, so I can't screenshot 1776. That's gonna make me sad. But if you guys come along, I would love it. I would love to have you as viewers, so we can have.
If you'd like, I can ask anyone who is subscribed to unsubscribe from you to try.
I would jokingly say that. I don't mean it. Please stay. And then I'm also on Twitter at Counterpoints, CONORPOINTS. But you can find me. I did a video with Vosh. I do videos with Faraday Speaks every now and then. Obviously, this was a sincere pleasure. So I hope we can do this again in the future. And then hopefully we can all grow together and maybe make a better world instead of dropping down into civil war and having all the terrible shit that our news media tells us to do every day. So I loved it, bud. Thanks for having me. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, catch you soon. Bye bye.
Yep. Bye.